Today is April 22nd, 2026. It is 5 p.m. I'd like to welcome everybody here this evening to this meeting of the Bismarck Planning and Zoning Commission. And with that, I'm going to call the meeting to order. And Sandra, would you please call roll?
Brian Bittner. Cole Johnson.
Here.
Gabe Schell.
Here.
Mike Schmitz. Sheldon Civic. Connor Swanson.
Here.
Kendra Taylor. Al Wangler.
Here.
Mike Schwartz.
Here. Thank you. With that, we'll move on to the first item in our agenda this evening, which is approval of the meeting minutes for the March 25th meeting. Commissioners, what are your wishes?
Move to approve.
We have a motion from Commissioner Johnson
Second.
and a second from Commissioner Swanson. Any discussion? Not seeing or hearing any. Sandra, would you please call roll?
Commissioner Johnson.
Yes.
Wangler.
Yes.
Schell.
Yes.
Swanson.
Yes.
Chair Schwartz.
Yes, motion is approved. With that, we'll move on to the public comment section of our meeting this evening. And with that, I'm going to open up public comment. And what this is that we can, if you are so inclined, you can step up to the podium and discuss any item that appeared in last month's meeting that was a public hearing, or any item in this agenda that is on the consent agenda. If it has a public hearing this evening, we'll leave it for the public hearing. So is there anyone that would care to step up to the podium for the public hearing? Yes, this would be the time to do it. And if you would please put your name on the log there and introduce yourself, that would be wonderful.
Hi, my name is Deborah Hill. I hope I am addressing the right meeting because I'm looking at the agenda and I'm hoping I'm at the right place at the right time. But my concern for Bismarck is the lack of green spaces for our children, the lack of planned development for green spaces I say our children, I'm 69 years old. I bike at the park, I walk at the park. It's all ages, and it's for mental health, physical health, you name it. They're talking about the need for children to get away from technology, to get out into green spaces. And my concern is when we plan green spaces, we're not building parks like JC or Hillside. We're doing John Giese playgrounds with some greens we're calling green space, which is actually a hill that isn't usable for children or, anything. Lovely to look at, but not functional. And so there are certain developments. My example is the one on La Pointe Loop. 100 houses, not one green space, walkable green space, and all of that. And I think we want Bismarck to be beautiful. We want it to be healthy. We want our children to have places to grow, and so that's my concern. Thank you.
Deborah, thank you. I'm not going to tell you you're at the wrong meeting, but actually and it's good to hear your concerns. But I think the Parks and Rec, or the Park Board meeting would probably be the best place to present these concerns. It would start there. And you just missed their meeting. So anyway, thank you so much for your comments. With that, I'll ask, are there others that would care to step to the podium for public comment? All right, the third and final call for anyone that would care to step up to the podium for public comment. And I'm not seeing or hearing anyone, so we're going to close the public comment for this evening and move right on to our consent agenda. And there are a number of items on our consent agenda this evening. The first is item number A, which is DCN First Edition. It's a zoning map amendment, and staff's recommendation is call for public hearing, and then a major subdivision preliminary plat, and staff's recommendation is to tentatively approve. Item B in the consent agenda is Clear Sky Second Edition. It's a request for a zoning map amendment. Staff recommendation is call for a public hearing. and then also a major subdivision preliminary plat, and staff's recommendation is to tentatively approve. We're on to item C in the consent agenda, which is Berg Acres addition. It's a request for a zoning map amendment, which staff recommendation is to call for a public hearing, and a major subdivision preliminary plat, and staff's recommendation is to tentatively approve with conditions. And the final item D, which is the final item in our consent agenda, is Capital Electric Second Subdivision, Block 1, part of Lot 2. And it's a request for a zoning map amendment. Staff's recommendation is to call for a public hearing. Commissioners, what are your wishes?
I'd move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
We have a motion from Commissioner Johnson to approve as presented.
Second.
We have a second from Commissioner Swanson. Any discussion, commissioners? And I'm not seeing or hearing any. Sandra, would you please call roll?
Commissioner Johnson,
Yes.
Swanson,
Yes.
Wangler,
Yes.
Shell,
Yes.
Chair Schwartz.
Yes, the motion is approved. We'll move on to our regular agenda this evening. And the first item is item A, which is JMAC Industrial Second Edition. And I believe Lauren is going to provide a staff report this evening.
Good evening, Chairman Schwartz and Commissioners. Yukon Investments LLC, with consent from the other current property owners within that plat boundary, request approval of a zoning map amendment from the MA Industrial and A Agricultural zoning districts to the MA Industrial zoning district, an annexation, and a major subdivision final plat titled JMAC Industrial Second Edition. The project area contains 37.05 acres and is located in North Bismarck, east of Highway 83 Northeast, in the southwest quadrant of the intersection of North 19th Street and 71st Avenue Northeast. The request would create 23 lots in 3 blocks. Most of the project area was annexed, platted, and zoned in 2015 and 2016. Sanitary sewer was provided in this area after that time on the west side of North 19th Street. However, there is currently no city water available in this area, and sanitary sewer has not been extended across North 19th Street for the eastern lots in this subdivision. Additionally, the only currently available point of access is from 71st Avenue Northeast to the north. The annexation request for the remaining unannexed east 43 feet of the northwest quarter of Section 10 is incorporated within the proposed subdivision and is included with the request for a final plat. If approved, the annexation would be recorded prior to the final plat. The applicant has stated an intention to begin developing lots in this area this year. In order for this to occur, all municipal services would need to be provided prior to development of the lots, including construction of North 19th Street and full city water, sewer, and stormwater services. The applicant may enter into a development agreement to determine the implementation and timing of necessary improvements for that. The property has been identified as industrial and industrial flex in the future land use plan. The area is adjacent to storage buildings and agricultural land to the north across 71st Avenue Northeast, storage buildings to the east with rural residential land just beyond that, undeveloped land to the south, and developing commercial land to the west. The Planning and Zoning Commission considered this request on February 25th, 2026, and called for a public hearing. The public was notified of the request via publications in the Bismarck Tribune on April 10th and 17th, and 79 postcards were mailed to the owners of nearby properties on April 10th. A physical sign providing information on the public hearing was placed in a publicly accessible spot on April 7th. Staff have received one phone call looking for additional information about the request. However, staff did not receive any formal public comments regarding this request. The request was evaluated according to standards contained in the Comprehensive Plan, Code of Ordinances, and state law. Staff noted concerns regarding the availability of public facilities related to lot development and street connectivity. The applicant has submitted a waiver to allow a cul-de-sac for North Star Circle and a waiver to allow a greater block length than the maximum due to site constraints for the area. These are provided as conditions of approval in the staff report. As a result of all findings contained in the staff report, City of Bismarck staff find that the proposed request would not adversely impact the public health, safety, and general welfare and is consistent with the comprehensive plan, code of ordinances, and relevant state law. Therefore, staff recommends approval of the zoning map amendment, annexation, and major subdivision final plat titled JMAC Industrial Second Edition, with the condition that a waiver for a cul-de-sac and a waiver permitting a greater block length beyond subdivision standards of 1,320 feet are approved with this request. Do you have any questions for me?
Commissioners, questions for Lauren? I'm not seeing or hearing any, Lauren. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is a public hearing, so I will open the public hearing. Would either the requester or representative? And I see Landon is stepping up, so thank you.
Thank you, Chair Schwartz. Landon Eimler with Swenson Hagen Engineering, representing some of the applicants on this project. Here's to answer any questions if you have them.
Commissioners, questions for Landon? Commissioner Shell.
Landon, as I'm sure you're well aware, as Lauren just noted it, and we've had conversations in the past, this property does not have access to city water at this point in time, and for our policies that we have for development, no building permits would be issued for any lots within here until a development agreement or a plan is created to discuss access and water and some of those other municipal infrastructure pieces. Just want to make sure that you and your client are aware of that and put that on the record.
Thank you, Commissioner Shell. Chairman, yes, yeah, they are certainly aware of that. They are aware that water needs to be connected here. Sewer is locally available. Water is a little far away at this point. There is a sort of a master plan in the work to bring up water from 19th Street, which is the existing 19th Street, which is quite a bit south of here. But yes, plans are in the works for a development plan that would bring that water up to this area and then develop portions of this project.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Shell. Commissioners, additional questions for Landon? I'm not seeing or hearing any, Landon. Thank you. The podium is open for anyone else that would care to address this agenda item. And I'm not seeing or hearing anybody stepping up. So with that, I'm going to close the public hearing. Lauren, any additional comments?
No, thank you, Chair.
All right, thank you. With that, Commissioners, this is a request for a zoning map amendment, an annexation, and a major subdivision final plat. Staff recommendation for all three is to approve with conditions. What are your wishes? Commissioner Shell.
Chair, could I ask what the conditions, what the staff conditions are for the zoning and annexation? Can you walk through those? Or what the conditions, I guess, are for all of them?
Lauren?
Commissioner Shell, Chair, Commissioners. So typically when projects are grouped together, the recommendation is the same for all three of them. Really, the condition is more so for the plat, but since they're all grouped together, the condition for approving those waivers for the cul-de-sac and then the greater block length would be the condition.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. Good question, Commissioner Shell. Thank you. Again, Commissioners, what are your wishes?
Move to approve as presented
With the conditions?
with the conditions. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
We have a second from Commissioner Wangler. Commissioners, any additional discussion? And I'm not seeing or hearing any. So with that, Sandra, would you please call roll?
Commissioner Johnson,
Yes.
Wangler,
Yes.
Swanson,
Yes.
Shell,
Yes.
Chair Schwartz.
Yes, the motion is approved. With that, we'll move on to item B in our regular agenda, which is the Land Development Code. And I believe Daniel is going to provide us with staff briefing on this.
Good evening, Chair Schwartz, Planning Commissioners. So this is the public hearing for the Land Development Code, a repeal and replace of Title 14 zoning and subdivision, and also the zoning map, which would correspond to the districts in the Land Development Code. Last month, I promised to be brief. I won't make any promises this time, but I will be as efficient as possible. There is a lot of content to cover, but I do want to make sure to leave plenty of time for your comments and any public hearing as well. So I will be focusing on what's changed, and I think that's, we'll assume a little bit of familiarity with the existing Title 14, but really today we're here to talk about the changes to this. Unfortunately, it's just too much to show you in a traditional strikeout and underline format. We did include a table in your staff report that does outline a lot of the notable changes, and I'll cover a lot of those this evening. But those are really the only ways we have available to highlight this for you. I do want to say that we do have online our consultants from Clarion Associates. And then, of course, other staff have been integrally involved and know some parts of this much better than I do. So when you get into the questions, we may have to tag team a lot of that. So I will also say that we do have a QR code on the presentation, which will be here the whole time. So if anyone is watching from home or in the audience and wants to follow along and read the draft yourself, that is available right there. Okay, so where are we in the process? We're nearing the end. We've been at this for about 2 years now, and from the initiation of the project through assessing the lay of the land and then drafting the document in 3 separate installments. This is the full final draft, and that's been prepared through help with the steering committees and technical committees and the public. And hopefully, if we had a lot of questions early on, we may still have some, but we're hoping to get to some more answers and to the point where we can have a document that will work for us as a community. We've been saying this kind of a lot, and it may get a little tiring, but we are trying to implement the comprehensive plan. Another multi-year long process went into that, which was adopted in 2022. And so really what we're doing is we're taking the guidance that the public gave us, that the city commission adopted in that plan, and trying to make it a reality through the zoning ordinance. That's a very visionary document. It's a very blurry in some respects because it's a long-term plan. However, we're really putting the fine-tune details on some of the plan goals. The Land Development Code is really intended to be objective, to make sure these standards are applied consistently and fairly to everybody and are predictable. So a developer knows when they come to start the process really what to expect, and the public knows what to expect in their own neighborhood and their own the vicinity of any businesses they may run. So that is really our goal, and so you'll see this throughout the entire process. We also want this to be user-friendly, something that's really not just something staff and the consultants who really look at it will be using. We want anyone from the public to be able to open it up and understand what they can do on their own property, what may be happening around them. So that's our goal throughout all of this. We also are trying to recognize the existing character of neighborhoods. We did a study early on to show how many parcels in our city don't meet current standards in the zoning ordinance, and it's probably more than you might expect. These lots are maybe too narrow, or they're too small, or there's too much density, or maybe the setbacks aren't quite right. We counted about 7,000 parcels currently in the city that, for whatever reason, don't meet current zoning standards. And that happens, because mostly in 1953, they passed a zoning code and they applied it everywhere that applied 25-foot setbacks, 7,000 square foot lots. And a lot of the traditional older neighborhoods just didn't meet that. And the goal was maybe eventually they would catch up and be modernized over time. That never did happen. And so the new comprehensive plan is really recognizing that having a diversity of neighborhoods from the core areas to the suburban areas to the rural areas is not a bug, but it's a feature. And so we've written this intentionally to try to capture the existing conditions of those different areas and to nurture them and enhance them as development continues. This was not created in a vacuum. A lot of people were involved in the process of writing the draft that you have here. Steering committee was convened early on to guide staff in writing it, both from the development community side and representatives from public organizations, as well as staff from the county and city, parks as well in drafting this. We've updated you as well as the city commission and other public boards along the way to kind of give you a understanding of where we were in the process. We've held a number of stakeholder events and open houses for the public, and hopefully through all of this, we've been able to gather that information and draft something that meets the interests of a broad number of people. If anyone was not fully involved in that, hopefully they saw our legal ad last week, which was the longest one we've ever had. So we figured if we wrote a really long legal ad, people would see how important this was, and that announced this meeting for today. Okay, just a couple of other housekeeping things before we get into a lot of the details. There are a lot of other changes that will be needed throughout the entire code of ordinances for the city of Bismarck. Zoning is really just referenced in lots of different places, and we need to be consistent. We don't have this for you. Your role is overseeing Title 14. If this does proceed with the city commission, we'll have another ordinance to kind of clean up the other sections of the code that need to in reference to Title 14. So that's just something for your information. Okay, organization and structure of the Land Development Code. In other words, where did that section go? This is the title, the table of contents in the Land Development Code, and I'll kind of walk through the different sections. It starts with general provisions and general zoning standards. These are sort of the legal formalities, the things you need in any code to understand how it works, and also some of the basic standards of establishing a district, establishing a zoning map, and then the dimensional standards, what is a setback, so forth. So that occurs really upfront in the code, and it gets applied in the other sections. The next chunk of chapters really relate to the zoning districts. This is where you get into what are the standards inside of each district and how do they vary between the districts. We'll go into each of these in a minute. Finally, the use table, what are the allowed uses and how are they defined, and any specific standards that apply to those uses. And then a number of chapters relating to development standards. So once you've determined what you can build where, this is how it gets built. And we'll go through those. And then finally, we get into a little more of the administrative sections. How is land subdivided? How are the procedures functioning? And then nonconformities enforcement. I don't want to belittle the importance of these. Sometimes they're incredibly important when they come up. We won't dwell on them in a lot of detail, but they are there if questions do come up. So you'll notice throughout the code that there's just a different look from a very text-heavy document to lots of tables, illustrations. We've been talking about that throughout. And that's, once again, to make it more user-friendly, hopefully. The core of that is our use table. And I think from a staff perspective, and hopefully from the public, this will be one of the more helpful features. I would say this is probably the best starting point if you're really wondering where to get into this document. Start on page 104. And what this does is it tells you each use on the rows and in each district on the columns and whether it's permitted in that district, either by right, which is P, or with a special use permit, meaning coming to you for permission, and with a public hearing with an S, or with an asterisk, it means it's permitted, but there may be certain standards applicable, and then you just follow the code on the right to get there. If you're using a digital version, a lot of these things are hyperlinked, as you can kind of bounce back and forth. We did have a use table back in 1953. We sort of lost it. I'm guessing it became difficult for staff to keep up back in the day when you had to do everything by hand. So it's not a new concept, but it's new for us today, and I think it will come in handy over time. Districts and uses. So I'm going to walk through the new districts. We'll have to familiarize ourselves if this does get adopted with some new names, new titles. There's a lot of similarity, and I'll speak to that as well. The Rural Residential Estates District. This is a new district for large lot rural residential, 8.5 acres or greater. There aren't many existing lots that apply for this. However, as things go forward, we may see more of these. Our comprehensive plan does recommend using this district for urban reserve areas to allow future urbanization in those areas. We do have a number of traditional rural residential districts of about an acre and a half or so or more. We don't have as many as we used to after changes to the extraterritorial area boundaries, but you see them there, and they will remain as is in the ordinance. Very few changes to that. Residential suburban. That is our name for what is currently referred to as R5, R10, and for the most part, They're unchanged except for a few things which I'll talk about. These are areas where the dimensional standards have been applicable after 1953, so you can think of these as the post that code. So wider setbacks, a little bit more space between dwellings. So we have reduced the dimensional standards to some degree, so from 25 to 20 foot setbacks on the front, from 6 to 5 on the side. But it's fairly similar to existing. You would be allowed to have more dwelling unit types, so not just single family, but also 2-family and 3-unit townhouses in these districts. And this was one of the goals of our comprehensive plan, to allow more of a mix of different housing types at a house scale density. So we're still talking about low density residential, but just a little bit more variety allowed in these neighborhoods. The RM, residential multifamily, is similar to today, allowing multifamily housing as well as townhouses. In this case, we're really simplifying the way density is calculated. Instead of having an RM 10, 15, 20, so forth, 7, everything is just 30. But we do recognize there are important protections that are needed for adjacent lower density residential areas. So instead of using the density as really the primary way of getting at those basically compatibility factors, there are other things in this code. So there's a residential transition standards. So if you're building this next to a single family neighborhood or home, you need to step it back in height and not overshadow these homes. If you're getting especially high, you might need to do a shadow study to prove that you're not casting shadows in homes. You still have buffers that would be applicable, and variety of tools that we do have available in the development standards to make sure we're not negatively impacting surrounding neighborhoods. So that's the intent there. The RU, residential urban district, is similar to RS. These are the core areas developed predominantly prior to 1953. So this has more flexibility than we currently have in our ordinance. So a little more density is allowed. The dimensional standards are reduced, and now you're allowed. I'm sorry, there's a typo here. Single family, 2-family, or any number of townhouses, so up to infinity. So 4 or above, as well as up to 4. So I'm sorry about that. But that is in the code. So townhouses will be allowed broadly in this district. The RMH district is residential manufactured housing. We have a district like this today, and it hasn't changed much. We have reduced some of the standards, so density and some of the spacing distances are reduced to try to bring a few more of these into conformity. Actually, very few of these conform to today's residential manufactured housing standards, so this will bring a few more of those existing ones into conformity. Okay, this is a new district, residential mixed use. This is mostly confined to the core areas and along corridors in the core area. This would allow a range of residential uses and densities, but also a very small scale of commercial uses, typically confined to corner lots or scale restrictions to those uses. So this is really intended at that maybe small little corner cafe or something that would be low impact, but potentially fit within these neighborhoods. Also matching some of the historic character that you may have seen here. So that is a new change that this ordinance would allow. Office mixed use. These areas are very similar to what we currently have as RT. You can think of office parks. Mostly those would be the character of these areas. However, multifamily residential and a very similar character of the RM would also be allowed in these districts. CX, we're kind of moving up in intensity here. This would be similar to the CA district today, but a little bit more expansive in terms of what the CA is permitted to have. In fact, one of the reasons CA kind of catches a lot of people now is we don't allow drive-throughs in the CA. So that's we've removed that restriction, and so that opens up the CX to a lot more potential uses. But you can have mixed use. So you can have multifamily alone or mixed with commercial. It's probably, of all of the districts, maybe the most broad in terms of the flexibility and allowance of uses, although there are still some restrictions on scale. So it's like a big box store may not be allowed in the CX, but a smaller scale would. Now, the CG, these areas are along our predominant commercial corridors, such as State Street, along interstate interchanges and Bismarck Expressway. These are maybe some of the regional drivers for commercial uses. This is where the big box stores would be appropriate. Now, multifamily residential on its own is not permitted in the CG district, so it really have to be mixed or in one of those CX areas. The IX is industrial mixed use, similar to what we have as MA today. And this is fairly similar, although there would be limited multifamily potentially allowed through a special use permit or live work, and I'll talk a little bit more about live work in a moment. IG, these are the heavier industrial districts. We have recalibrated, I think I would put it, some of these districts. The MB is very small today. There's very few MB uses. You probably have never seen one. I haven't since I've been here. Had an application in the MB district. So we really have expanded that area considerably to include areas that are appropriate for heavier industrial because they're very limited exposure to residential or other sensitive uses. The downtown. So this is, we could spend the entire time on this, but I will say we have brought the downtown section to the Renaissance Zone Authority. It is in the format of what we call a form-based code. So it is quite detailed in the design standards in the downtown, and that is intentional. It really is intended to provide more predictability and the ability for staff or architects in many cases to read this and to understand what would be expected or not. There are abilities to adjust, and of course, any case-by-case design may need those escape valves. However, we want to have some predictability in the downtown where buildings are closer together, impact each other more, and design is a greater function. We already have design review requirements, and so this would assist with those. We do in the downtown divide the one downtown zoning district into 5 sub-districts, which are actually based on the frontage, because really we're focusing much more on how this will look from the public right-of-way and from the public realm, more so than what's going on inside of the building. There's a lot of allowances for different types of uses inside of the building, which can come and go and change over time. But the form is really the goal here in terms of what we're looking for. And these 5 different areas have 5 different form factors, which are included in the code. Agricultural, very few changes here. We've made a few minor adjustments to align with Burleigh County's ordinance just to keep in line with them. The PCI, now the current P public district will be divided into 2, and this is the one for areas that are developed. So these are public, civic, institutional, capital grounds, airport, but also very utility-based functions, the landfill, sewage treatment plant, and so forth. So public ownership is not a requirement of this district, so it could be sort of a quasi-public use. But that's the intent is to create a space for these types of civic uses. Open space is areas that are not developed. So these are the parks, but there are also coulees, stormwater detention ponds, in certain areas that are very difficult to develop and may be in private ownership or public ownership. So once again, the district doesn't dictate who would own it or control it. A few overlay districts to go over here. This is the Airport Height Overlay District. This does exist already. It's in Title 10, and this is based on a master plan that was done in 2017. So we're basically moving it over to 14, where it belongs because it's called zoning. And so this would be the place for that, and but otherwise very few changes. This tells you how tall you can build in the vicinity of the airport before you're creating any safety hazards and concerns with the Federal Aviation Administration. Airport noise overlay. This is very, very limited in impact because most of this is inside of the boundaries of the airport's district anyway. However, there are restrictions on noise levels in those areas or what you can build because of anticipated noise in those areas. Hazardous wildlife protection. This is to protect against conflicts with birds and airplanes. So any water features that could attract hazardous wildlife, we do need to watch that. It's something the FAA does provide guidance on, and we've been applying this in most cases anyway. It just incorporates it into our ordinance. Finally, last of the overlay districts, plan overlay districts. So we have a number of, I'll call them customized districts, PUDs, plan unit developments, or just conditional districts. There are currently 132 on the books today in Bismarck. Over time, we've adopted these. The map that we're presenting to you today has removed a good portion of these, about 70% of them, because we believe that the new base zoning districts meet the needs that those original PUDs or conditional districts were intending to meet, and so that they're no longer necessary. There are still 39 of them that we would recommend carrying forward into the new code. But this would be the new way of organizing these. And instead of where, if you think of a PUD as a kind of a self-contained standalone zoning district that has everything written into it, including a plan and a development site plan, the plan overlay district is more like our conditional districts. It has a base zoning district which would apply, and then it would adjust that base to some degree. And we feel like that's probably a more efficient way to run these, and especially in the long term, because PUDs become outdated as you change other portions of the code and then are no longer consistent anymore. And so this would change along with the rest of the code if that should happen. So I should say those PODs, we've recommended retaining those. We don't have all of the text for you for that. We wanted to make sure this was going to work first as an entire land development code, and in the future we'll come back with how those will need to be adjusted to align with this code. So that's another project for another day, but I just wanted to let you know about that. So putting everything together, we do have a new zoning map. This is available in an interactive format for you to review. I'll say it does reflect the revised extraterritorial area boundaries that came into effect on March 1st on the basis of a new agreement with Burleigh County and the City of Bismarck Commissions. So that is it reflected in the new zoning map. Now, I just want to be clear, we really did not use this opportunity to make substantive changes to the map. So this is not the opportunity to entitle new development and see these changes occur with this map. This is really intended to capture existing conditions. So either what's there built on the ground or what the entitlement is, what the zoning district is today. We tried to create as large of a contiguous area as we could, but not make any significant changes to what could be built on these properties. Through the zoning map itself. I do want to highlight one change. We did make this recently since your consideration draft was released, so I want to make note of this, and it also emphasizes some of the changes we've been trying to make here. There is a block just actually very close to where we are today, at the corner of let's see, it's between Rosser and Avenue A and 6th and 7th Street. This is all owned by Sanford. Today it's split into Health Medical District and Residential Multifamily 30. However, it is all one big site, all parking, including Sanford's College of Nursing. And so in the change we've just made to the map, this would all be part of downtown and the medical sub-district, and because it is all functioning that way today already. So that is a change that's in the map that you have before you today. Okay, those are the districts and the map, and now we're getting into some of the new uses. These are some new uses that have standards in this code that don't currently in our ordinance. Courtyard development, this is kind of a new concept. Our consultants have brought this to us. Well, I shouldn't say new, it's actually very old. In fact, we have some older ones in Bismarck. It's a style of development where you may build around a common courtyard, the homes, and have access in that way. And so we've got some standards written in this code for how that could be applied in various districts. Live-work dwellings, this has been in the building code for a number of years. We would allow these in the RX district and in some some other districts. This is similar to home occupation, although it's really a purpose-built structure where you may have a portion of it dedicated to your public accommodation, your commercial use, and then a portion dedicated to your residential use. It is common in certain areas. We haven't allowed it until this code in Bismarck. Medical marijuana uses, I won't get into this in a lot of detail. We have them in Bismarck. We currently don't regulate them any more than we would a retail use. So this does have a couple very simple requirements through a special use permit and some spacing distances that would apply, similar to some other communities in North Dakota. So wireless communications facilities, also something we don't regulate today, cell towers. And so we would have certain districts where they would be permitted or not, and then some standards that they would follow. If they're towers, attached units, small cell, they're all defined a little bit differently with different levels of permission. Mobile food vendors, some very simple requirements for how they would operate. We want to encourage these. Our comprehensive plan does support the use of mobile food vendors in various places. These are just some, I think, fairly basic requirements for how they would be done safely and with health. Temporary dwelling units, so if you're rebuilding a house and you want to put in a temporary home on the site during the time of construction, there's provisions for that. Finally, battery storage is a newer use that we weren't really thinking about much in recent years. However, we have some basic standards for this. Normally, you're going to see these in rural areas, so the counties deal with this more than we do in the city, but we thought we'd have some basic standards. There's a few uses that we've revised. I just want to call out group homes. Based on the number of people you'd be licensed to have in the home, whether it's 6 or under or up to 9 or over, they're really sorted out into the different zoning districts. Group homes it's important to accommodate these. It's actually fair housing federal law to allow group homes to be within basically a similar household that we would allow in any home. We need to allow group homes, and so we've written, I think, a fairly common sense requirements for where they would be allowed at the different scales they're found. A lot of things vary by scale in this new district, so not necessarily by the different types of uses. So restaurants, retail, vehicle repair services, depending on how many people they serve, they may be appropriate in smaller or larger scale. So for example, vehicle repair, if you're oil change for a small impact could be totally appropriate in a commercial district. However, if you're doing a major body shop, that might be something more appropriate in industrial or industrial mixed use. So we try to make those differentiations within the uses. A number of things that currently require special use permits would no longer require them. So a lot of the time you've spent on this you'd be well aware of these changes. Drive-throughs, gas stations, car washes, accessory dwelling units, oversized accessory structures. These things are fairly technical in nature. They rarely get denied or at least certainly not on the grounds of their technical specifics that are in the code. So these would be dealt with at the site plan level by staff according to the provisions written into the code. There are some other things that do require a special use permit now, but these are things that we'd be removing that requirement. Data centers, we have ordinance requirements for this already. The League of Cities has recently released a model ordinance on data centers, so we've really tried to incorporate some of their guidance and recommendations into our code. And really what we're doing here is dividing larger scale based on the megawatts of power generated, or not generated, but used on the site, and differentiating the requirements, mainly to protect noise. I think that's really our big concern with data centers. So all the minor and major data centers will require noise studies where we can look at the impacts in advance and try to protect property owners from those. But they're still mainly industrial uses, and so that hasn't changed as well, unless they're very minor. We call them micro data centers that utilities sometimes use, but otherwise they will only be in industrial areas. Asphalt and concrete batch plants, a few changes here. These are important both in temporary basis or sometimes in permanent for roadway construction projects or various construction projects. There's a little bit of inconsistency in our current ordinance, so we really tried to clean that up and and make it clear these are industrial uses in industrial areas, and we have separation distances to homes, although in some cases we've reduced those separation distances from what's currently in our ordinance. Event centers, just to point one thing out, this is actually a fairly recent change that was not in your draft previously. If there's an event center that involves animals, we currently really don't have that addressed in the code. And so we would propose some very simple language so that if you do have an event center that involves animal, you need to follow animal boarding standards, which we do have in the codes, and which includes separation distances from residential uses around. So they would be allowed in the draft that we would propose. However, with the same animal boarding standards we would apply in other cases. Okay, so shops and storage, these are some uses we've actually really spent quite a bit of time working on and talking about. They're quite common in our community and very popular and don't quite fit very well into our current ordinance. We've had lots of debates over the years of how to deal with these. And we've got in the draft some solutions to propose. And there are different classifications. One would be a personal flex use. This is a new term for us, at least, in our zoning ordinance. And these would be allowed in residential districts. There would be for personal use, storage, personal indoor recreation, and very commonly, what you might see in a private accessory building in someone's backyard. The only difference is you could cluster them and create them in a neighborhood. There is a demand for this. We do have people asking about this, and in fact, you have approved these similarly in for example, in Misty Waters in a planned unit development. So we watched that very closely and really haven't, to this date, seen concerns, and so staff have grown more comfortable with these, and we don't necessarily need to classify them as industrial, which is currently how we have, as long as there's some basic standards written into this. And so that's what the code attempts to do. So really they're written, the scale is limited. Really, we're not running commercial operations out of here. Even home occupations really belong in the home and not in these uses. So we feel like we have some fairly common sense standards for how the personal flex uses can fit into residential areas. Self-storage, we've actually issued a number of planned unit developments over the years for self-storage in commercial areas. So this basically follows that trend and allows them with design standards and a special use permit. So and there are a number of, they've actually gotten quite a bit more higher design over the years, and including ones being built in Bismarck. So they do seem to fit into commercial districts if that is taken care of without having any negative impact on the activity that we're trying to generate in those commercial areas. So portable storage containers, we do see interest for these as well. So these would be allowed to be used as accessory buildings. However, if they're in residential areas, there's significant screening, or in some cases you may need to clad them to look more like an outbuilding, a traditional residential outbuilding. So those would be, the allowances would be broadened for those both in residential and commercial areas. Okay, now we're getting into the development standards section. Like I said, the how things would be developed. And a number of these chapters are new, but as we get into this, not all of the concepts are new. We're just kind of moving things around in some cases. We've also incorporated a lot of policies that have been written and approved by the commission over the last 10 or 20 years. And so we've taken a lot of those and brought them into the code, which I think helps with the transparency and allows the public to see what they are and know that they apply. Right now, they're not always easy to find for people from the public. So first chapter, improvements. This is what gets built after a subdivision is approved. A lot of this really deals with engineering, from planning, and once you approve a subdivision and it goes to the city commission and gets recorded, we kind of pass the baton in that case over in engineering, and they deal with a lot of the roadway construction, the utility construction. So this dictates mostly the timing of that. We don't really get into the design standards. We don't get into the cost policies. Those are still done through separate policies. However, this does give some basic standards of when things are getting done. And also, if there are changes that are needed through a development agreement, how does that process work? How do we negotiate with developers for when and how utilities are installed and the infrastructure? There's a chapter on site and structure design. This is basic design guidelines for certain types of development. We've really only kind of dipped our feet into the water of this. Some communities go further. In discussion with our steering committee, we really didn't want to become heavy-handed in design in our community. So some of this is reserved for an overlay district, which is yet to be defined. And so if it does come a time in the future where we want to have entrance corridors or maybe a higher level of design in certain areas, we'll have this. We would just be able to apply it. Or not. And so other things do apply citywide. So if somebody would be converting a single-family home into a two-family dwelling, which would be allowed in pretty much every district, there are certain standards you would need to meet to make sure you're still meeting the character of the neighborhood, the single-family character, and not just looking like you're kind of adding things on in an unfinished fashion. There are standards for multifamily housing as well as mixed use and commercial, although, like I said, I think they are very basic. Parking and loading, this is currently in our ordinance. It seems like every time we get into it, we kind of move toward the direction of a little more flexibility. So we do have ranges of in the table for each use. And however, a lot of those ranges have been widened in terms of the minimum. So we've, for example, all dwelling units would just require one parking space. We know that people usually may want more than one parking space, but that's the minimum you'd be required to build. Of course, you can always build more than that. But aside from that range, if anyone wants to build outside of that range, either below or above, there are a number of options for adjusting that. There just needs to be a rationale, and so we would work as staff in an administrative fashion with making these adjustments. And the code includes a number of different ways to justify that. It could be the type of use maybe doesn't generate the parking demand that others would of that same classification, or it could be that you've installed some bike parking, or you have great on-street parking, or you have other means to deal with it. So lots of options available in this, and we do have some standards that are applied to parking lot design. They're fairly similar to existing, a few different things like preventing vehicle overhang from going into walkways, but a lot of that's not much different. Loading has been removed for the most part, as long as you have loading spaces. Really, if you have loading spaces, there are certain standards that apply, but there's no requirement to have loading. We found that that's kind of solves itself. I mean, companies know their loading needs and usually just take care of that. So we haven't had a need to regulate that necessarily. We did get a comment today on parking. I think in particular, well, I guess I should say in general, maybe questioning the need for parking minimums, but in particular related to child care centers. We have had quite a bit of debate about this internally and with the steering committee. There are communities who are removing all parking standards. Duluth comes to mind as a peer. We haven't gone that direction. We do still have standards in the code, but we have tried to loosen them in many ways. Understanding that people do understand their parking needs and usually are able to meet them. Okay, a new section on mobility and connectivity. This is dealing with street design, and a lot of this is done at the subdivision level. So we've moved a lot of these standards out of the subdivision section into this section. A lot of coordination with engineering on this, of course. The street standards are fairly similar. Some of the widths have gone down a little bit. So commercial streets have gone from industrial have gone from 48 to 40, collectors from 44 to 40. If there's parking on both sides. But for the most part, very similar and fairly similar to our existing practice, actually. We will be using the major street plan to determine the category from arterial to collector rather than the functional classification. And there's some reasons for that, but it basically allows us to plan for future arterials and collectors more easily in our zoning. Alleys and loops are addressed. Loop lane is kind of a new concept our consultants introduced to us, which is similar to a cul-de-sac but has some green space on the inside. So we've got some standards for how that would be applied. Traffic impact studies, we do these already, but this gives a little more definition for when that gets triggered. So these are for larger scale developments that generate a lot of traffic. At what point do you need to study that in more detail to determine if you need improvements or what needs to be done to facilitate that? And a few other things. I won't necessarily go into all of them in great detail, but private streets I think are important. We've discouraged them, and we always have. We continue to discourage them. However, there are some times in which they may be necessary, and so we've spelled out a little more detail when a private street may be appropriate. Public streets are better in the long term because it just is understood by everybody to be maintained publicly and part of the public realm. However, they don't always are not always appropriate. Intersection spacing. This is basically how far the intersections are spaced from each other. Block length would be another way to refer to this. In the most dense urban neighborhood areas, residential urban districts, these would tighten up a little bit to about 900 feet. However, in the residential suburban, they'd stay the same at about a quarter-mile spacing maximum. So they could go lower than that. Of course, for arterials, we sort of want the opposite. We sort of want more spacing, and so that's dictated in here as well to allow more traffic flow on the arterial roadways. The landscaping screening section, we have a few changes here to go over. I think maybe a good way to put this is we're moving out of industrial areas to some degree. We're lightening up some of the restrictions and requirements in industrial areas where we frankly find the most maybe resistance to our landscaping. We've had this in our ordinance for probably 10, 12 years now. And in practice, that's where we see sort of the most resistance to this. So in some industrial areas, smaller scale, the perimeter landscaping will no longer be required, as well as the interior landscaping islands inside of parking lots will no longer be required. Some of the buffer yards in these cases would also be reduced in size, although we still will have buffer yards and they still will be required in terms of planting material, but there may be some more space in certain areas. But on the flip side, the Land Development Code will require street trees in residential neighborhoods, which are currently not required. So this is something that other cities do. In Fargo, we've watched them closely. Our comprehensive plan did note this as a goal to have more tree coverage within residential neighborhoods. So this would become a requirement within the Land Development Code at the subdivision phase, so we wouldn't be necessarily going into existing neighborhoods. And there is the ability to do that through the Partners in Planning program, but not the requirement to do that. However, as new subdivisions get built out, they will be fitted with street trees. The code doesn't dictate exactly how that is done, and so we still have some work to do in the mechanism for this. However, it would become a requirement. We've made a few changes. You are allowed to delay the installation of your landscaping. Of course, we're in a winter city. Good 7 to 8 months out of the year, you really can't do much in terms of landscaping. So you can delay for seasonal reasons or other reasons. Maybe the contractors are hard to find and hard to line up. So there are opportunities to delay with a performance bond, which is different. Currently require a cashier's check today. We allow a bond, which contractors tend to use more often. There's some standards on fences and mechanical screening. We have requirements in our ordinance already, but there's more detail on how you would measure the 6-foot tall fence and where that would be applied. Same with the screening requirements for HVAC and other systems within a building or outside of the building, including dumpsters as well. That's all covered. Parks and open space, another chapter. We have a neighborhood parks policy. Ms. Lee, I'm guessing, I believe, yeah. Oh, Hill, I'm sorry, Ms. Hill, had a comment on this earlier. And so it is true that the Parks and Recreation District they're the ones creating the parks, they're the ones maintaining and operating them. However, we do have a hand in this, and we've worked very closely with the Parks District in this process. And this does incorporate our existing parks policy into the Land Development Code. So as new subdivisions are coming to us and coming to you, we will work with the Parks District, we'll continue to work with the Parks District to make sure there's a neighborhood park. There's some standards for the design of those parks that are written into this code. There's some flexibility. We know that, every case is unique and the Parks District can negotiate some of those standards. However, we do want to see typically at least a 3-acre minimum. We want to see a flat land for functional use and centralized location. So it does give a baseline for those negotiations. A regional park can certainly work as well, so it wouldn't need to be a neighborhood park if that's in proximity to those homes. And so that would be another option as well. Or a private park. This Land Development Code does give that option as well. If the needs can be met within that neighborhood, for something that would be run and governed by an HOA, there are standards that could apply for that as well. This chapter also deals with what can and cannot be done in areas that are designated for stormwater and drainage with easements on plats, and I think some fairly common sense requirements there where we really want to make sure water is retained. Also for areas with steep slopes, these are things we do already when we get new subdivisions that come in along the bluffs of the Missouri River or in areas with steep slopes that are susceptible to subsidence. We do already put slope protection easements on the subdivisions. This gives us a little bit of guidance on how and when that would be done, and that is written into the Land Development Code, especially if the slopes are 15% or greater in slope. So next section, outdoor lighting. This is new, although we have included outdoor lighting in certain PUDs in the past. This is a new standard to be written into our zoning ordinance. A lot of cities do this, so there is sort of a well-worn path. Our consultants have provided this language based on best practices that they've seen in other communities. So basically, different light trespass standards are applicable in different districts. So if you're in a residential area, really the amount of glare should be minimized, and of course in industrial areas not so much. I think this is a pretty good image that just kind of gets to the gist of what the section is about, which is point the light down instead of out or up. Up really affects your night sky, and out affects adjoining property owners. So we want it pointed down, including the design of the light fixtures, the intensity of the light, and there are requirements that if there are more intense lights, they would be dimmed at certain hours of the night. This does apply across the boards to new development, to new lighting in subdivisions as well as in commercial areas. Site plans for commercial uses will require a lighting plan, which we will still work out exactly how that will look. It can be pretty simple, but showing us where the lights will be and how they will be oriented. And certain automations to make sure they can be controlled by the users. So signs, it has not changed much. We redid this a couple of years ago, so we really didn't make changes here except for a few I'll mention. There is a nice table, I think, that will consolidate all of the sign requirements into one major table for usability. But the requirements really haven't changed. We would allow wall signs in multifamily residential buildings. We currently do not allow this. We've had some requests, and they would be limited in size and illumination. However, this would allow those. The RX district I mentioned is new and would allow commercial uses in an area that's still quite sensitive because of the residential uses there too. So we've really followed a lot of the downtown fringe standards for signage in that new RX district, where they would be limited in size and scale. In most of these areas, signs aren't permitted at all today, unless they're with a school or a church or so forth. So we've tried to make sure to match those standards. Subdivision of land has not changed too much. This is where you find your basic standards of lots and blocks. We have added new standards for siting outdoor warning sirens. This is what you hear when there's a tornado in our midst, and we need to think about how we space these and with new development to make sure everyone can hear these sirens. And so really all this does is it triggers that conversation so our emergency manager can find the best site available at a location that's high enough and appropriate for the sirens. We have basic survey standards that are written into here. Our city surveyor has worked with others in the North Dakota Survey Association to find appropriate standards for when monuments are placed and how they're placed, and some things that are a little over my head, but we've trusted that, yeah, those match what the standard survey practice is, and we've incorporated some of those into the code. We don't have to write everything into the ordinance. Some of this can remain a technical standard, but we've included a few things. Okay, we're getting to the final stages here. Administration of this code, this is really the day-to-day work that we operate with, and you, in many degrees. So these are the different projects that could come across our tables, and where they go. Do they need a public hearing or not? Do they need a pre-application meeting or not? And different procedures that would be applicable to all of them. So similar to the use table, this is a pretty good place to start when you're looking at procedures for the administration of the land development code. A few things are done in common that really were not in our ordinance currently, but are in practice, and a lot of this has been really newly written or completely rewritten. But it really allows us to do things that are unclear today, such as, if there's a deadline for, all of our projects have deadlines after you approve them, for which they have to be implemented. But sometimes things need extensions, and it's unclear who has authority to do that. So this does give grounds for giving extensions under certain cases. And a lot of sort of administrative things that happen behind the scenes would be legitimized, and we'd feel like we have the right authority as staff to make those decisions. This would institute the signs that we've been doing as a pilot project for a number of years. All the public notice methods are laid out pretty clearly in this draft, including signs in advance of public hearings. We found that they've been pretty effective. We've asked people at our public hearings how they find out about this meeting, and signs so far are the leading method. Okay, so each specific project will have review criteria. This is important for you because in our staff reports, we will spell out really what we should be looking for in an approval, and we will capture all of that, and we'll give it to you in the staff report, and you can review that. For example, annexation, we'll have a number of things, and we'll check the boxes, and if everything checks, that's how we know whether it could be approved or not. One thing that you might notice, so the zoning map amendments will go directly to public hearing, so we'll skip the consideration step. In a lot of cases, it's a application that's submitted to us. Staff will continue to vet these and make sure everything's true to form. However, if it is an application that meets the completeness check of our process, we will bring it to you in a public hearing directly. So this saves a little bit of time. And it's also something that, really for due process reasons, it's important to have the hearing. So there really shouldn't be times when we would just not allow the hearing anyway. So the variances would be allowed for historic preservation purposes. That's another small change. Maybe a bigger change, which is less applicable to your role, but will be the Renaissance Zone Authority. Design and review will be split into major and minor. So some of the changes, you're changing a few doors out in your building, or signs or other small modifications to a building could be done administratively, whereas today they might go through a full public hearing with a design and review, or not public hearing, but meeting with the design and review board. Okay, adjustments to standards. We've spent a lot of time really thinking about this, and anytime you have something on paper and you apply it to the real world, there's always things that are just vary on a case-by-case basis, such as, especially when it comes to things like landscaping or engineering standards, site triangles, access standards. A lot of these things really rely quite a bit on the existing context of the area around it. And so we've written in criteria, and on the one hand, it's important to have a little bit of flexibility in the code, so you're not getting caught up on very small details. On the other hand, you really don't want open-ended discretion for staff to protect us, because we don't really want the pressure to be able to make any decision, but also to cordon us in a little bit and say, this is where you have staff authority to make a adjustment, and this is where you really should go to the variance process or have the ordinance inspected in more detail. So we've really written these out in different criteria throughout the code for different sections as they're applicable. But the adjustment is also intended to create a record of these changes, so we can make sure we're being consistent with the adjustments, and so we can evaluate that record and say, oh, well, if we're always adjusting this, maybe that needs to be changed in the code over time. Okay, the subdivision process is probably where the most changes will occur. And so we've saved this for last, I suppose. So today we have a minor plat process and a major plat process and a lot modification process. We would move to what we're calling a complete subdivision and a simple subdivision. So two steps. The complete subdivision would have a preliminary and a final plat. However, the preliminary plat is where the public attention would be drawn. So if there's a zoning change, we would hold that with the preliminary plat. And that's where you see all the lots, you see the topography, you see a lot of the features. And the preliminary plat is really designed to focus on those bigger picture issues. And if that does go through and get approved by you and the city commission, if there's a zoning change with a public hearing, then it goes to the final plat stage, which would be an administrative process. So that would be as long as, and this is important, as long as the final plat substantially conforms to the preliminary plat, staff would be authorized to approve it. And really at that stage, we're looking at the survey details, making sure the easements are in place and all of the I's are dotted and T's crossed. But the public important features should be dealt with already. Now, if it doesn't match the preliminary plat, then it will come back to you to make sure that it does meet the public's interest. So that's how the complete subdivision process would be written. Now, the simple subdivision would be for what we currently call lot splits, lot line adjustments, or a replat where you're creating 3 or fewer lots. This would go directly to City Commission on consent agenda. We currently really don't involve, these aren't really called subdivisions at all. They're done outside of that process. But what this does is it gives us the survey level detail and the importance that they need and the recorder's office needs to make sure this is a legitimate plat without the lengthy process that is involved in the complete subdivision process. So just a little bit of a diagram of the changes. So whereas today you'll do the pre-application and a preliminary plat and a final plat, and behind the scenes we actually go through a fairly extensive process of vetting what we call the final Mylar. Basically with the complete subdivisions, we would jump right to the preliminary plat, and then the final plat would really take the place of that behind the scenes technical corrections and aspects of the plat. And then, of course, physical improvements after that's completed. And similar with a simple subdivision as well. This would be just a staff review for technical standards and then on consent at the City Commission. Now, lot combinations would be a little bit different. This is something we would not require a survey for. So if a property owner wishes to combine multiple lots, we would review it to make sure it meets standards, but we would just have them record a declaration saying these are combined. The importance of the recordation is so if down the line a new property owner doesn't inadvertently split them again and then realize now it doesn't meet our zoning anymore. So, okay, finally, nonconformities and enforcements. These are, what we've done with nonconformities is we've split it up into different types. So there's nonconforming uses, structures, lots, site features, and signs, and they're all treated a little bit differently, although, the basic idea is that the zoning code does not apply retroactively. So when we're adopting something, if you're there, you can stay there and continue in operation. In some cases, you can make some changes. You can rebuild if there has been demolition. And so we get into a lot of those details. It's very important for financing, for just the usability of these lots over the long term. Banks do look at this very carefully, and so we've tried to make this as least impactful on owners of non-conforming properties, understanding that there are cases where we do hope it does redevelop into something that does conform in the future. Enforcement is something that's done in collaboration with building inspections and planning, in some cases public health. So this really defines sort of some of the procedures of enforcement and some of the remedies that are in place. Really already dictated by state law, however, it's just it's spelled out in a code for usability purposes. I do want to say one thing. The definition has changed for household and family, and is relevant for enforcement. So in this code, the occupancy is no longer limited to 4 unrelated members of a household, which it is today. We will be making changes to the building code, and that same function and intent will be addressed through building code in terms of number of people in the bedrooms that may be allowed or per space of physical space in that structure, but not in the zoning. And this is something that more and more communities are doing, partially for legal reasons, because if you're treating households that are unrelated differently than households that are related, and that can become a legal issue for us, but also for enforceability. It's very difficult for our zoning code enforcement team to really know whether their people are related or not in different houses. So this is something that would take effect with this code as well. Okay, finally, there is a definitions and measurements section. I won't get into the details because they are details, absolutely, but they are important because disputes do come up sometimes with how we measure things and where they're measured from. And so we have more diagrams, more clarity, I hope, on these things to resolve any disputes. And as well as in a definition section, we try to define all the important terms that are in the Land Development Code. Okay, so in a moment we'll have time for more discussion. I do want to say if this is a potential next steps, if you do choose to make a recommendation today, or you could wait as well. But if you do choose to do so today, this would go to the City Commission for a hearing in May and a public hearing at the end of May. And the way this is written in the Land Development Code, there would be an interim period. So the code would not take effect until October 1st in its entirety. However, we do know there are people who are kind of waiting for this and who may apply after it is adopted. And so the applicant would be able to choose which code they would want to follow. So it may be a little bit of chaos for a few months, and we would just have to endure that before there would be one pathway to follow. However, if you do choose one, you have to stick with it, so you can't pick pieces of both. But this would really maybe enable people to prepare for the eventual adoption, including enable the city to prepare. We have a lot of applications and guidance documents and all of these things, the website, that will need to change, and so it would give us time to do that before it really becomes fully effective. Okay, so if you have any questions for me, I can attempt to answer or punt it to somebody else.
Commissioners, questions for Daniel? Okay, Commissioner Shaw,
Got a
please.
couple anyway. Daniel, in the document, there's a series of footnotes. Are those to be removed when the document is accepted as final?
Thank you, Commissioner Shaw. Yes, I did neglected to mention that. Yes, the footnotes will be removed after this meeting. So when it goes to the City Commission, they'll see the version that will be it's in its adopted state. And so they're there for breadcrumbs to show you what's changed and what's new. And then there's a lot of commentary text that's in a blue box. Those will all be removed as well. Some of the tables will be changed. That includes sort of comparison with existing codes to new. Those will be changed to just show what will be new.
If I may continue, I got a list here relating to the open space concept and some of the park property. Generally speaking, the Parks and Rec District owns and operates. There might be a building or a pro shop for a golf course or something along those lines. Do you foresee any restrictions from Park District being able to use those sort of facilities, or in new areas build those sort of facilities as it relates to calling something open space, that there's still buildings in the open space? Can you maybe speak to that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Commissioner Schell. So yeah, buildings will certainly be allowed in the OS, Open Space District. I think it's really intended to dictate the use. So if it is a park with a pro shop or, shelters or certain functions of that use, then that would certainly be permitted. So it should be mentioned explicitly in there that.
Okay, and then maybe my last question, if you find a really innocent typo in here, would you wait for the year later to come back, or are you looking for some sort of authority to make those sort of revisions, or can you maybe speak to that? I'm not saying that there's a typo there, but there might be one somewhere in the document, maybe, just saying.
I'll tell you, I found a typo today. So there is a typo, at least one. Certainly after today, if you were to recommend this, we would hope, and if you want to make that explicit, you certainly can, that we could make those typos before it gets to city commission. After that, I think maybe we would wait until we made a formal ordinance amendment. If our consultants have a different opinion on that online, you can certainly jump in on that, but that's what we'd intend to do.
And I think I have one last one. Daniel, as it relates to some of the policies or procedures, whether it's secondary access or easement release policy that you're saying are now incorporated into the land development code, is it the intention to then repeal those policies or have some formal action that signifies that that's existing or that goes away or has been folded into the land development code and we don't have a secondary access policy and also a land development code that might say the same things today but in the future might diverge if they weren't repealed?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because the policies, they were adopted by the city commission, so I think it may be appropriate to have an action by them if they wish for that reason. I think that is a good idea.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Commissioner Schell. Commissioners, additional questions for Daniel? Commissioner Wangler.
Daniel, I guess my question would be is, we got this request on parking to go down to 0 required on this, and this is just one of, I'm guessing, many little changes that are going to be looked at and said, maybe it should be changed. Is that what would happen a year from now? And if so, would that require this extensive procedure again that this went through, or are those type of things easy to make changes on?
So, Commissioner Wangler, not necessarily. So you have a few options on that. You could direct us today to make that change, and we will make it. So if it is your wish as the Planning Commission to reduce the parking or eliminate the parking for childcare, just direct us to do so, and we'll do it, and include that in the City Commission draft. This comment came in this morning, so it's not reflected today in today's draft, but we can certainly respond to your desires on that. The other alternative would be we could wait for that. In a year, this will go through an ordinance amendment process, and it could be done then or any time in between. It's really up to you.
Okay, then, if it's done in between, is that an extensive adjustment requirement, or is that something that can be taken to the city commission and say, we'd like to change this from whatever it currently says, 6 to 0, or if we say 0, that it has to be 3, or something like that, or does that become a very long, drawn-out, technically expensive procedure to go through?
Sure. So yeah, that's a good question. So it is pretty extensive because it would go through, because it's an ordinance, to make that change, it would go through this body and then 2 readings with the city commission. Certainly nothing like today, but it would go through that process. So if we were to bundle that with other changes, we could do that as well, or change it today.
Thank you, Commissioner Wangler. Commissioners, additional questions for Daniel? I'm not seeing or hearing any, Daniel. Thank you. Mm-hmm. With that, this is a public hearing. I will open the public hearing and open it to those.
Thank you. I know it's late and I know we're tired. Please, please, please hear my concerns. I'm concerned about the green spaces. This is why I'm here, and the land development time frame. This is why I came. so that you can hear my concerns. We talked about problems with zoning from the 50s. 20-plus years ago, La Pointe Loop was built, over 100 houses, no green space. And I understand that everything wasn't in place then, maybe. 10 years ago, Legacy High School was built. North of Legacy High to 43rd, there was open land that could have been a beautiful park. It is complete housing today. Housing, twin homes, apartments, no green space. Unless they're calling John Giese their green space, it is not accessible. You have to drive around to get there. So some of my concerns is for, Daniel said, well, the recommendation is 3 acres for new developments with some flexibility. Those words scare me. Some flexibility. So do we get the size of a house, the size of a playground? Do we get 3 acres? And my other question is about, he said if we did a regional park, that would, maybe take the place. Do we have plans for a regional park in Bismarck, North Dakota, anywhere north with all the new housing, developments, buildings? That's a question that maybe I should ask somewhere else, I don't know. But those are my concerns, that when there's flexibility, I feel like sometimes the public isn't the winner. And I thank you. I know it's late. I know you're tired. Thank you for hearing my concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. Daniel, just a quick question for you. You mentioned green space with the land development plan. Would the future land development, 2045, be a spot to look to? Is green space included in that?
Sure, Chair, Commissioners. So in our comprehensive plan, we have a future land use plan, which has something called parks and open space, and those are the areas we would expect to see dedicated for some sort of open space in the future. Now the neighborhood parks, we don't really know where those will be until the subdivision builds out, because that really dictates the appropriate locations for those. So they may be in other areas as well.
Okay, thank you. Does that help a little bit? Okay. All right. The podium is once again open for others that would care to address this agenda item. And I'm not hearing or seeing anybody. So with that, I'm going to close the public hearing. Daniel, any additional comments?
I do have one more comment just to make regarding the park standards. So while it is true that there is flexibility in terms of how the design standards would be applied, I do also just want to make it clear that this is all done in public. And so it's not as if staff and developers are negotiating the park, what the park might look like. It'll come to you at this table. It'll go before the Parks and Recreation District. And so everyone will be fully aware in the area of how that park will look and some of the amenities that will be in there.
Thank you. All right, Commissioners. With that, we have a request for a zoning ordinance text amendment. Staff recommends approval, and a zoning map amendment. And staff once again recommends approval. What are your wishes?
I would move to approve.
We have a motion from Commissioner Schell.
Second.
We have a second from Commissioner Johnson. Any additional discussion, Commissioners? Commissioner Schell.
I would just want to commend the staff and consultant team on putting this together. This is a lot of work. I'm engineering staff, but I get to watch all these great planners do amazing things as part of my day job. And it's really a document that they should be proud of, and we as a community should be proud of. But it's through the hard work and efforts of all those individuals that contributed. So I just want to thank them.
Thank you, Commissioner Schell. Commissioners, additional comments? I can tell you from sitting on the steering committee that there was a lot that went into putting this together. And I think being a layman, you don't really understand the impact of a lot of these rules until it comes to a time when you need to use them. And then you understand how well they're put together and what a nice job that's been done. So again, I commend staff and consultants for doing a wonderful job putting this code together. Any additional comments? I'm not seeing or hearing any. Sandra, would you please call roll?
Commissioner Johnson,
Yes.
Swanson,
Yes.
Wangler,
Yes.
Shell,
Yes.
Chair Schwartz.
Yes, the motion is approved. With that, we move on to other business. Commissioners, is there any other business for the benefit of the commission? And I'm not hearing or seeing any. So with that, our next regularly scheduled meeting is scheduled for May 27th. And I invite everybody to attend. And I thank you for your attendance tonight, and I adjourn the meeting.